So one of the last satsangs we had, we talked about on page 12 of this book about how Ramana asked us to ask for whom is there an outside and an inside, which is a fascinating concept there to look into this idea for whom is there an inside or outside. When there's identification with a particular body-mind mechanism, there's automatically a wall created between inside and outside. And it's interesting to note that the people I was close to, after total realization happened, they said there was a wall that came down. And I thought that was interesting how they put that. That there didn't seem to be there wasn't a wall anymore. And what that really means, or how you could operationalize that or objectify or measure that, I'm not quite sure, but it was perceivable to others. Now, another thing I recommend is to amplify this concept, you can go to, this famous book and read anything about what he says. You can go through the content, table of contents, and see if any subject in the table of contents has anything to do with awareness, inside or outside consciousness, and read through that chapter and see if it has anything similar with this inside or outside. So, for example, when Susan and I were reading the book a couple of years ago, I remember coming across this passage where Nisargadatta was talking about thoughts are just like the wind. They don't have any particular direction, and they're not for any particular person. Just like when the wind blows, it blows by the tree, but the tree doesn't say, oh, this wind is for me. Wind is blowing everywhere in that particular direction. So ultimately, thoughts can arise within this chit, within this pool of consciousness. And a thought will come up and we'll say, oh, that thought is for me. That's how strong the identification is, where otherwise the thought is just there. Just like a tree saying, oh, this wind is coming just for me. Well, it's not coming just for the tree. It's simply blowing. So that may not translate to actual experience, but it's a pointer to get somebody away from identification of saying anytime a thought arises within the chit, within the pool of consciousness, is to really look for if this thought is really meant for me. And at least question it. So you could say, well, I have a thought, and it's a thought from my past that no one else has, therefore it's mine. So he's saying, well, okay, where is that past? Show me the past, locate the past. Show me now your mother that was 25 years old or 30 years old. Show me the house that you used to live in that had the red front door and gray paint on the house that you're referring to, that you lived in when you were 5 or 7 years old. And you take me back to that house and it has a white front door and pink paint. So the thought itself is transitory and no longer belongs to you in that moment. So he goes on to say, the bottom of page 2, there is only one consciousness which subsists in the waking, dream, and deep dreamless sleep states. In deep dreamless sleep, there is no I. The I thought arises on waking, and then the world appears. Where was this I in deep dreamless sleep? And by I, even though in the book it's large I with quote unquote, he's talking about on page 12, bottom of page 12. Mm-hmm. He's referring to the small self. Where was this I in deep dreamless sleep? Was it there or was it not? It must have been there also, but not in the way that you feel now. The present is only the I thought, whereas the sleeping I is the real I. It subsists all through. It is consciousness. It is known, you will see that it is beyond thoughts. So upon reading it, the translation can be a little confusing. So what he's calling this sleeping I is, and I question the translation, but the sleeping I is referring to the I that's present in deep sleep state or in even the dream state. And then he's saying that sleeping I is even present during the waking state. And he's saying the sleeping I to distinguish from the waking I, which is a really good teaching tool, because if you just say, well, the I exists through all 3 states of consciousness, it's okay, I get that, I've heard that. But what is that? I don't know that I that exists through all 3 states of consciousness. So he says, okay, but let's start from the known and go to the unknown. So you know what the present I is now. And he says that's not real because that I disappears in the dream state and in the deep sleep state. And we'll call that I a different I. We'll call it the sleeping I. So now we've kind of removed ourselves away from the waking I, and there's a sleeping I that he's referring to. And that sleeping I is an I that exists during the dream state and the deep sleep state. And that I that exists during the deep sleep state and the dream state is the same. So now you have an I in the waking state and an I in the dream states of consciousness. So now there's two. And when there's two, it's dualistic, and you can sort of start to sift between the waking I and the dream sleeping I. And he's saying you are not the waking I. Okay, then what am I? Then he's saying, well, look into that you are the sleeping I. And what is the sleeping I? The sleeping I is that which is observing the dream state and observing the absence of any dreams, which is called the deep sleep state.
And so, Bala, that waking eye can't know the sleeping eye or the eye that exists in all three states. Is that right?
Exactly. The waking eye could not even know the sleeping eye. But by trying to do self-inquiry about the sleeping eye, you're automatically negating the waking eye. Say, okay, I'm not real in the sense that I don't last, I'm transient. And he's saying to get a beginning taste of what this sleeping eye is, note that there's an I that is the same during the dream state and the deep sleep state. And that is not the waking eye. And like Brendan just said, the waking eye can't know this deep sleep eye, the sleeping eye that exists in the deep sleep state or in the waking or in the dream state. So then this is where the inquiry happens. It's like, okay, well, what's happening from my point of view right now in the waking state? What's happening in those two other two states of consciousness? And if you describe the dream state, there's something present there that illuminates the dream state. And the dream state seems to be unfolding on its own, and there's an observer to that. Say, okay. And then there's an observer to the absence of anything, or a void, or a blank, which is the dreamless state. So what's the one thing that's common between those two states is the observer. He says, okay, now that observer is the same throughout all three states of consciousness. And there's an observer that's observing the unfolding of this waking state, just like there's an unfolding of the dream state. So in the waking state, we're always aware of what is being observed rather than the observer. Our focus is always on the objects rather than that which is illuminating perceptions, awareness. That which is seeing the objects. So those of you that have studied Atma Bodha and have studied the Upanishads, you go back and look at the Kena Upanishad and say, oh, that's when he says, it's not what I see, but that which makes me see. It's not what I hear, but that which makes me hear. Same idea. So what he's saying is, he's almost answering the question, then what do I do with this knowledge? He's implying that why get caught up in the content of thoughts or the objects in consciousness? Why would you want to do that? Why not at least try to understand that which is making you perceive those thoughts, making you perceive the objects? So let's say you're sitting and meditating and you're trying to be still, and a thought comes up of yesterday somebody cut you off in traffic and you're reminded and reliving the anger that you experienced when someone cut you off in traffic, or perhaps this morning. What he's saying, instead of paying attention to the thought, the content of the thought, which is anger, pay attention to what is and living that thought. What is the light behind the awareness that's making you aware of the thought? Because otherwise you'll try to work on slowing down the thought, eliminating the thought, and then you're always responding to one step removed from what he's trying to ask us to really focus on or pay attention to or be aware of. And then when we get to the point where we are responding to the thought, like, oh, I shouldn't be angry, or I shouldn't have gotten angry, I'm supposed to be more spiritual, by then we're already 2 or 3 steps removed from what he wants us to pay attention to.
Well, when you say pay attention to what enlivens thought.
Say that again, Mary?
When you say pay attention to that which is behind the thought or enlivens the thought, well, then isn't that kind of objectifying it?
Yes, it is objectifying it. And it's hard not to objectify anything when you consider yourself an object. So what would you do?
Well, it just seems to me it would be more a matter of letting go of the having the attention on some experience or object. And then that just leaves that openness. It seems like slightly different than attending to it.
Right. So the image I had when I was referring to pay attention to is, instead of looking forward of object in consciousness, I would look backwards to that which is making me perceive the thoughts. Going back to the Kenya Upanishad, it's not what I see, but that which makes me see. So behind that declaration is an implied, oh, there's something notionally behind that's the source. And I'm an object in consciousness. So as an object in consciousness, why would I want to focus on the objective thoughts, the objectified thoughts of an object in consciousness? The thoughts are one step removed from being an object in consciousness. And then telling a story about being one step removed, he's saying, withdraw back, so to speak, and at least know that you're an object in consciousness and that you are a manifestation from source. So you can't, with the physical eye, look back, but for lack of better words, be aware, pay attention, focus on, or know that you are an object in consciousness. And then that object projects out of itself thoughts when there's identification. And so when you're focused on the projection of the object, you're two steps removed from source.
I think I have a question, Bala,
Mm-hmm.
but I'm not exactly sure how to phrase it. It's just, something's nagging at me, and I think it has to do with this feeling of, in this conversation, downplaying the importance of the things we objectify, such as thoughts. So, in other words, I think a way I'm hearing this is, the thoughts that you think are your thoughts and are so important and you're projecting, so forth, are not so important. So I'm just wondering, how then does one take action? How does one live? How does one make decisions if one doesn't take these thoughts to be personal and important?
By knowing that the decisions are going to happen regardless of whether you think they're important or personal. What you asked was a variation on the theme of, if I'm not in charge, then life and living will not go on. because if you follow the line of thought, I have to make this decision, and it's an important decision, and the self-inquiry would be, well, who's it important for? What's important for me? Because I don't want to have a bad decision made. Because if I have a bad decision made, or if I make a bad decision, then I'm going to suffer in the future. So therefore, I have to make sure I have to make the right decisions all the time. To me, that's there's a lot of pressure in that, in living life.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is.
And that's what we call bondage.
Mm-hmm.
It reminds me of a saying that to try to help you actually get out of the snarls of getting caught up in trying to control our destiny. It actually is a saying, how important is it? How important is this? How important is it? Even if you're trying to get to a meeting on time or a class on time, and you're getting there and you say, oh, I think I'm going to be 10 minutes late. And we create a story that when I walk into a class of 50 people, I'm going to be 10 minutes late. And we ask ourselves, well, how important is it? And you walk in 10 minutes late, and people are probably not going to die because you're 10 minutes late. Nothing really is going to happen because you're 10 minutes late. So the questioner says on page 13, the Buddhists say that I is unreal, whereas Paul Brunton in The Secret Path tells us to get over the I thought and reach the state of I. Which is true? Maharishi, there are supposed to be two I's. The one is lower and unreal, of which all are aware, and the other, the higher and the real, which is to be realized. You are not aware of yourself while asleep. You are aware in wakefulness, waking. You say that you were asleep. You did not know it in the deep sleep state. So you did not know that you, as Dimitri, was asleep in the deep sleep state. That thought doesn't come up.
Mm-hmm.
So then the idea of diversity has arisen along with the body consciousness. This body consciousness arose at some particular moment. It has origin and end. So he's giving you another, like, tool number 179 to think about. Body consciousness arises during the waking state. Body consciousness is not there during the deep sleep state. And he's also pointing to the fact that when there's body consciousness, there's diversity, plurality. When there's no body consciousness, is in deep sleep state, there's no plurality. So he's saying, think on that for a while. And not only does body consciousness lend itself to diversity, but it has a beginning and an end. Which is not permanent, which is not real. Because what originates must be something. What is that something? What is that something? It is the I consciousness. Who am I? Whence am I? On finding the source, you realize the state of absolute consciousness.
So the state of absolute consciousness is the deep sleep I?
Even beyond that, because there's awareness of the absence of the waker and the dreamer in the deep sleep state. Or, and put another way, there's the presence of the void, or the presence of nothing, or the presence of blank. But that is known. You can know blankness. You can know nothingness. You can know the absence of the waker and dreamer. And if you know something, it's objectified. So he's saying it's even one step before that.
You mean objectified?
Yes, it's objectified. The blankness is objectified.
Yeah.
So what he's calling as the absolute consciousness is where the consciousness is not even aware of blankness, dreams, waking state, or even the observer that is consistent, or the substratum through all those three states of consciousness.
So you're saying that the substratum that is consistent throughout all those three states is not absolute consciousness?
Exactly. And in Sanskrit, it's called akshara. That's substratum. And then the word that he's referring to, which is absolute consciousness, is uttama purusha, beyond the substratum. Which cannot be known by an objectified personality, individual, body-mind mechanism.
It cannot be known.
Cannot be known.
So then when you're saying to look behind or to remove the attention from the external, say, we're not trying to look for that unknown absolute consciousness.
Right.
Because it's not going to be found.
It's not going to be found.
What's going to be found?
That there would be a deep intuitive understanding that this and this are simply objects in consciousness. And everything is an object in consciousness.
So what's seeing that then?
What is seeing that? There's nothing seeing that. There's no individual or entity that's seeing that. That's the point. They're seeing happening without an individual, without an entity, or without a what. When you ask the what, it means what object, what entity, what person. And there is not an entity that's seeing that. Simply seeing is happening. Understanding is happening. Knowing is happening. Demetri, you had a question? Let me unmute. I'm sorry. Hold on. Yep. Go ahead.
Okay, you can hear me?
Yeah.
And again, I think I have asked that question before already. And it's not even a question per se. It's when we talk about the waker, the dreamer, and the deep sleeper. Well, this deep sleeping state seems deep enough, very profound. I mean, as nothing. It feels like almost death in a way, because there is no trace of Dimitri there in this deep sleep state. And death is even a more profound, so to speak, state, for lack of a better word. However, and then James was asking a question. So this substratum that goes through the waking state, the dreaming state, and the deep sleep state, this substratum is not it, basically. Then, and I can understand why, because it's all dependent on the body, basically, on the body-mind that goes through the waking state. If there is no body-mind, there's nothing else. There's nothing to talk about. So then if we go down one step down, we have then life and death, which again are relative categories, because one exists only as another side of the coin. Like life and death, they kind of just two sides of the same coin, right? And then there is something else that is ultimate reality, like Atma Purusha, or whatever the term you use. So what I'm trying to understand is, how is it possible? Because even now, as we're talking now, all those deep sleep states and dreamer states, they're just concepts, images. So what we really can know right now, immediately, is our immediate surroundings. Now we're talking, well, something is happening around. This is our direct experience. Mm-hmm. This is all we can know now. However, at this particular moment, somebody like Ramana Maharshi or Nisargadatta may posit that, hey, this is all not real. And what is real is that which transcends both life and death. But if it's not experiential, how can it, what authority they have to speak about it? If it's not experiential, how can it be known?
Okay, no, that's all a good question. So, first of all, the deep sleep state is not death. Or if it is like death, then we have something to look forward to, because it's very peaceful. If I know that whenever there's an absence of Bala, that there's going to be peace, I'm all for that. Bring on death. I hope I die, in the next minute, because then I'll just be, all there will be is an experience of peace. So that's one thing. The second thing is, you actually answered the question on a more deeper level, is that this absolute consciousness is not dependent on anything for its expression. Or let me put it this way. When you said that consciousness is dependent on the deep sleep state and the dream state and the waking state, there, even though it's the substratum, there's this awareness of deep sleep state or void or peace. There's awareness of dreams. There's awareness of the waker. It's conditional. It's conditioned awareness. It's that it's dependent. It has to be aware of something, of an object. Whereas this absolute consciousness is not dependent on anything. And I wouldn't even say it's independent, because that's just using a dualistic opposite of dependent. So I wouldn't even say it's independent. But it exists as itself. So you actually, in your question, put it very, very nicely, that it's only this substratum that we're talking about, the observer, it has to observe something. So the absolute consciousness, for lack of better words, is there's observing without any objects of observation. And so Atmabodha talks about, in this, there's a verse of a dance hall, and there's a light in the dance hall. Or think of it as modern times, there's a disco light in the dark dance hall, and the disco light is shining. And people are dancing under the dance hall light. The light is still there, but everyone's focused on dancing. And then everyone leaves. And one person comes back and says, oh, the light is illuminating the empty room. Right? Are you following? That's deep sleep state. That person that comes back is observing the light illuminating that empty room. And you can kind of understand, okay, yeah, I come back and see there's a light illuminating the empty room. Now, what he's saying, absolute consciousness, is where there is no empty room and there is no person coming back and declaring the light illuminating the empty room. There's simply awareness. And so what he tries to point is that you are that awareness. You are not observing the dance hall light, you are the dance hall light. The last thing I want to say is, going by your direct experience in the waking state, you said that's all what we have. He's trying to get you out of that. He's trying to say that don't rely on your waking state experience, because it's unreal. He's trying to get you out and look at beyond, if you can, using your imagination to think of the absence of you. Because anything in the waking state, you say it's direct experience, but that's only from the waker, which is what he would call an illusion, because it's transitory. So he's trying to say what direct experience is, and the only direct experience is that which comes from source. Oops. So if you notice now, some of the thoughts may be coming up, but there's, in self-inquiry, if you look when you do it, you'll find that the thoughts can almost be baffled. This is baffling. It's beyond our grasp, and immediately we become still. So at the same time, it almost has a dual effect of creating a sense of bewilderment, which notionally slows the thoughts down and brings a relatively calm mind. And two, you'll find that you're definitely not thinking about what am I gonna, well, you may, but what am I gonna have for dinner? What's gonna happen tomorrow? You're definitely not caught up in the anxieties and worries of the waking state.
Well, I was just going to say that. Well, it just kind of de-privileges the waking state. Because I just get so used to living under the assumption that the waking state is it. It's important. This is where I have to show up. The game is on the line, you know, and then the dream state and the deep sleep state, well, that's all well and good,
Right.
you know.
And if you notice, you show up at the waking state against your own will. And that is a great pointer about how things will happen without having you decide. You don't have to decide when you're going to wake up or how you're going to wake up. The waking up will happen. I mean, you can set an alarm, but you'll show up, and you'll continue to show up, hopefully for quite some time. Again, and so then we kind of say, well, what we're talking about now is non-volitional living. And so non-volitional living to me is exactly what you say. You'll show up whether you try to show up or not try to show up. And that's the best example of non-volitional living. But for some reason, once we do show up, we think we have to then bring volition into everything. Forgetting that when we wake up, we didn't have any say about showing up. And we didn't have any say about showing up when we were born. And yet, for some reason, we think that we have a lot of say and volition during our daily activities. And that we should have volition. And that volition should be of the highest quality, so we make the right decisions to benefit me, because that responsibility falls on me. So out of this self-inquiry, it came a sort of a new type of way of thinking is, how much of a say do I have in this living, in daily living, when I don't have a say about waking up and it's experienced every day? And that's easy to do every day that you wake up, or even when you go and you say, wow, I didn't really have a choice or any volition about going to sleep, and I don't have any volition about waking up. And those are like the bookends. And then for some reason, we end our day with no volition, and we start our day with no volition. But in between, we think we have all this volition.
Well, I suppose, I mean, just to I don't know, play devil's advocate. I suppose like a cognitive neuroscientist would say that your functioning goes offline, you eventually fall asleep, and then it comes back online when you wake up, and that executive functioning is actually your own personal will, and you do have volition during the day.
So you do have volition to turn it off?
No.
No. And do you have volition to turn it on?
No. But once it is on, I'm just trying to be facetious.
Yeah. Yes, Dimitri, hold on, let me, yes, Dimitri.
Some strange question. This Advaita means not two, right?
Mm-hmm.
But what are those components of the two that are not two? What are they talking about? That appearance of two that are not two, what is it?
So not two is not it. When you say not two, it's implying that there is not an answer to that. That it has two functions. Not two is pointing to something beyond the oneness. When you say it's not two. So you have two, and most people, well, not most people, but some people can think that not two means one. Oh, not two means one, right? Not two could be 8. Not two could be 25. So what the word not two means is that it doesn't point to any particular direction, which means you cannot know. It's purposefully left ambiguous to show that not two doesn't point to any particular other concept. So it keeps things unknown, which the mind cannot know. It also, in not two, it implies that we know two-ness or duality. We know that really well. We know dark, light, hot, cold, night, day, male, female, old, young. We know that. And so it's saying it's not anything that we know. But yet it can't be known. So implied in that word means that if you know of it, if you can conceptualize it, it's not what Advaita is pointing to. It's not what non-duality is pointing to. Because if you know it, even the substratum, if you know the substratum, the opposite is plurality. If you know the changeless, then it's only relation to the changing. So it's also a word to keep you in check. Say, oh, I know what it is. I know what absolute consciousness is. It's the substratum. Well, you just think, is there an opposite of substratum? Yes, that which is holding, which is being held. There's the holding of it, and that which is on the surface is being held, or whatever you want to say. Or I've experienced unity. Is that absolute consciousness? No, because what's the opposite of unity? Diversity. Oh, I've experienced absolute consciousness because it can't be known. Is there an opposite to can't be known? Yes, known. So it's not that. And when you go to the Upanishads, it says it's not this, it's not this, it's bigger than this, it's smaller than this, because it's not to try to give you an answer, but to show how futile it is to lock it in one particular concept. So if you say absolute consciousness is where there's no me, that's just the opposite of me. So is that absolute consciousness? No. Is absolute consciousness when there's no one here? It's just the opposite of someone is here. So that's not absolute consciousness. And that's what the sages are talking about as far as negation. Or if you're reading the beginning of, I believe it's Ramesh's book, Who Cares? In the beginning, there's a story of a student going up to the sage explaining that he's found, absolute reality, total enlightenment. And so you can read that. If you have that book, read the beginning of it if you feel inclined. And it's negating, see everything he's declaring, there's an opposite to it.
So you just leave no chance for the mind to grasp it. I mean, no freaking chance. And I have nothing else.
Right.
No fucking else. Just calculate it.
Yes. Yeah.
Because it's just there's nothing to lean against, you know.
Right. Right.
I mean,
And this is the very crucial point in the seeking, that what you just described, there's no point there, you know, et cetera, et cetera. And for those that have, there's this word in Sanskrit called titiksha. It's this ability to suffer. Is that you know that, but at the same time, you know that, but at the same time, the seeking is still going on. And so if you're honest, all it takes is honesty to know, okay, I know that there's no way I'm ever going to get this, but yet the seeking is going on. Then the beautiful thing happens is that the seeking, it starts to be observed and witnessed and seen as it has a life of its own. And so, ironically, the suffering of the seeking no longer takes a hold on it. And because you're in that place where you differentiate seeking and I'm not going to be able to get it. But that I clearly see the seeking continues, even though I don't want it to continue. And I know I'm not going to get anything, but the seeking continues. And it's like, oh, okay, the seeking is there against my own volition. And it's going to play out. And that can that can bring a tremendous amount of peace.
Could I add something, Bala? Would you say that not only the seeking, but everything is there against your own volition, and it will all play out?
Yes, you could say that, but in relation to the seeking is for some seekers, that's all they're thinking about. They're not thinking about volition in daily living. They're just focused on the seeking. And it's like, okay, I don't even care about whether I have volition or not in daily living, but the seeking is what is the primary focus in my life. And I see that I cannot grasp the end game here. And at the same time, the seeking is there. And so when you see, oh, wow, the volition, I don't have any volition over the seeking. It's going to happen on its own. Then there's a great deal of relaxation in the seeking. Even before total enlightenment.
So if I may, Bala, so then it seems, well, first of all, that makes me think, imagine at least, that this enlightenment, whatever that is a really transcendental or mystical, some kind of a mystical event outside of your realm of real perceptions or whatever that is.
Yes.
So basically it's futile to try to imagine that, well, because it's beyond the mind, so to speak. It's unimaginable.
It's unimaginable, but in what we were talking about is you would, if you understood this concept, you would say, okay, it's unimaginable, but yet the seeking happening through Dimitri is still trying to imagine it, and that's fine. There would be acceptance of that. So even though you know it's unimaginable, and yet the imagination of it is still continuing, there would be acceptance of that. And for lack of better words, there would be observing of and witnessing of even of the seeking. And then you have clearly see the seeking is not of my own volition. The seeking is happening through me. Pure consciousness is seeking itself through the body-mind mechanism of Dimitri. And when that is seen, then there is peace.
And my second point was that after this enlightenment, there is a certain way, it seems, correct me if I'm wrong, but after that enlightenment, there is a certain way to perceive, maybe, for lack of a better word, that the non-two-ness of that seemingly two, of perceiving that these are not two, right? Because it's not just logical deduction, like assumptions, like, well, there's not it, that's not it, this is not it either. So logically, it follows that it must be like this, like nothing about something, triple nothing. It's not
I would say I would worry about that when it happens. It's a lot just to perceive that the seeking is happening against your own volition. And this dichotomy of, I can't understand it, I will never understand it, and yet the seeking happens, can be very, for lack of better words, enlightening. Because then you understand the phrase, the seeker is the sought. Or when the Christian mystics saying that which you are seeking is what's looking through your eyes. That which you're looking for is looking through your eyes. And you feel and you feel that God, pure consciousness, is seeking itself through Dimitri. Against your volition. And that can bring a lot of peace. And yet the seeking will still, questions will arise and self-inquiry will arise because it's like, oh, okay, I guess this is what I'm supposed to be doing now. I can't figure it out. I won't know it. I won't understand it, but this is what's happening. And it will continue until it stops. But there won't be as much suffering involved in it. Like, today I took out the trash. I got to take out the trash. I got to seek now. Got to ask these questions. Got to clean the house. So I got to ask this question. Okay, I don't have any volition of it. So any final questions before we sign off?
just a wish. Please keep adding videos to the library, Bala.
I will put this one up. Namaste, everyone.
Thanks.